Thanks, Nate, and thanks to everybody for coming out. It's pretty awesome to stand up here. I've been out there a lot for most of the Creative Mornings, not all of them. I usually sit right around there. As Nate mentioned, I'm a fine artist, and I also run a nonprofit organization called the Medium Festival of Photography that happens in about 3 weeks at the Lafayette Hotel. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. I'm not a magician. I think that's probably good to just get out of the way. Earlier this morning, a good friend said, "You do magic?" And I was like, no, I don't. I did think about this idea, though, of course, in putting together the notion of photography as a magical act, which I really think that it is. And I thought about, what that definition might look like. And so I kind of revised my own definition of magic as making something visible that was previously invisible. And part of this idea for me relates to my career as a fine artist and the kind of photographs that I make, photography itself, and then the festival that I started. Photography, of course, is magic. I love this picture, and I love showing this picture to people who have never seen this phenomena before. So this is a picture of a tree, a shadow of a tree. But if you notice, there's all these little crescents there. And what this is it's a photograph of a partial solar eclipse. And what's happening here is that partial solar eclipse is being transmitted through tiny wormholes in leaves and projecting that image onto the earth below. So this idea dates to the very earliest days of photography. I'm talking 2,500 years ago. Aristotle was one of the first people to note this idea, that when light passes through a tiny opening, it projects an image of that thing. And this is really the magic of photography. It's that simple. This kind of illustration here is sort of like a camera opened up. I mean, of course, it's a cardboard box, but this idea is really what led to the birth of photography. Photography, as we know it, generally involves a negative or a digital sensor or an iPhone. All of it is magic to me. It is. This idea that light passing through onto this substance that is light sensitive and captures an image is pretty awesome. And so I want to talk to you about two things in the talk in general today. My role as a photographer, and then my role as a festival director, mixed in a little bit with my role as a crazy person. So this idea of creating a negative image is really what's central to photography. In photography in a darkroom, if you repeat that, of course, that image becomes a positive, and voila, you have a photograph. So when I started in photography, it really wasn't that magic to me. I had this camera, a Kodak disc camera. Yes, that dates me. I'm proud of it. I'm proud that I started with this camera. I remember going to Ritz Camera in La Jolla one day and saying, "Do they make black and white film for a disc camera?" And the guy just was like, "No, man, you got to get a real camera." And so I did, eventually, and I started to go down the rabbit hole of photography. For me today, this is more what photography looks like. I use large wooden cameras, the kind that date literally to the birth of photography. Not so much Aristotle, but the birth of photography being the 19th century. And this kind of experience for me is really what's central to my work, is this idea of being part of the landscape, slowing down, discovering things, exploring magic in some way. I also use a 19th century printing process. This is where things get weird, and I'm not going to go too deep in this, but I want to give you a sense of how I work, because in order for me to make a photograph, I don't just go to a camera store or someplace and grab materials and buy them and things. I have to order all these really kind of crazy, obscure chemicals that the TSA would stop me for and things like that. And so I mix my own chemistry, and then I apply this chemistry to a large sheet of watercolor paper. I spread it around, and eventually I have a giant sensitized piece of paper. It's called platinum printing if you know about photography at all or if you're curious. It uses metallic platinum. It's really expensive, like stupid expensive to produce. It's not a good place to start in photography. And just to be clear, I didn't start there. This is like I'm years down the rabbit hole by the time this is happening. When I first started making pictures, I was a transplant to San Diego. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and I was really amazed with what this landscape was like. The notion of what San Diego is to most people is like shopping malls and Fashion Valley or whatever it might be to you. And when I discovered these like 100-foot waterfalls in the so-called back country, I was really amazed. And so I started making pictures of these because they really were magic to me. Or pictures of my everyday experience. I used to live next to Balboa Park. This is a picture I made in Balboa Park, just one foggy morning. I was like, wow, look at this. It's really, really magic. These pictures weren't necessarily breaking any new ground, but it was a good way for me to start to learn about photography, get my feet wet, and discover things. I fell in love with the desert almost immediately upon moving here from the East Coast, and it's probably because the desert is such a diametric opposite of everything you would expect to find or could find on the East Coast. And so my career in photography really started when I went to this place. This is a place called Fonts Point. It's in Anza Borrego in the desert out there. And I had this idea of I want to go here and I want to make a picture at night. And what I want is to capture the magic of this landscape beneath moonlight so that it looks all kind of ghostly and weird. The Badlands look kind of haunting or whatever. And so I went out there with a buddy, set up my camera, opened the shutter, let the exposure roll for an hour or so. We drank beer, hung out, talked, whatever. And just sat there and looked at nothing, right? At absolute nothingness. And so I came home, went in the darkroom, and I got this. So this is an 8x10 piece of film. It's a giant piece of film. And I was like, huh, okay. But almost immediately at the same time, I thought, that's amazing. Because number one, I sat there for an hour and looked at this, and I didn't see that there's a city out there. This city is Mexicali, and El Centro is what the picture is looking at. And that was amazing to me because it really taught me something super important about photography, that even when you think you know what you're looking at, photography as an objective medium will capture things that you might not have seen or might not have been aware of. And so ultimately, this taught me a good life lesson. Embrace failure. And I think this is really, really crucial for anybody involved in any kind of creative endeavor. Because failure is our greatest teacher. It's what teaches us to pay attention if we know when and what to pay attention to. For me, that failure turned into this, which was the night photograph that I made, and it was mesmerizing and awesome to me. It was absolutely magical that an entire city of 1 million+ people was sitting out there, and I couldn't even see it. I mean, I thought I really was looking. I had a giant wooden camera, like, boom, pointed at this, and I still didn't see it. I had this image in my head, which is another good way to make photographs, but paying attention to what's in front of the lens is pretty important too. So this kind of work really started to take me in a really specific direction, which was exploring this idea of minimalism, exploring this idea of the desert, of these dark landscapes that really resonated with my being, in the sense that as a person who loves landscape, who travels a lot, cameras can capture things that are extraordinary, that are magical, that you might not even see with your eyes. And so this really became part of a very transformative experience as an artist. And so continuing to make this work, I did this for, 5 to 10 years or so. At some point, you start to think, well, how can this work evolve, right? These are 8x10-inch prints. I couldn't make them any larger because of this 19th century process I was using, and I was totally fine with that. But I had the idea, well, what if I made these bigger? And there's two ways to do anything in this world. One is logical, and it's easy, and it's what your parents would advise you to do. And the other is illogical and preposterous, and something that people would think you're completely nuts for doing. And anybody who knows me or who's worked with me long enough knows that I always choose the second way. I'm sorry, people who have worked for me, who continue to work for me. I do this. So for me, making bigger pictures meant this. It meant making a bigger camera, right? Why not? It only took me 3 years to build this. I built it with these hands. Very proud of that. I learned a lot about it. I didn't know anything about metalworking, building a big bellows, any of that stuff. I had people help. I, solicited advice. But what this did was really start to change my creative path. And I took the camera out to the desert, as you can see in the picture here. But where this creative work really started to go was into Los Angeles. And I started to make pictures with this giant camera at night in Los Angeles, looking at LA as a city that I know, as a city that I love, as a city that I think is diverse, and is so much more than the city that we know for celebrity, for plastic surgery, for blue skies, for palm trees, for amazing architecture, what have you. And so this kind of desire to find the magic in the everyday, to find something extraordinary in a place that is known so well to so many people is really what propelled me creatively to continue making these photographs. You run into some funny people when you have a giant camera in the middle of weird parts of Los Angeles. You get really strange questions like, are you making a movie? Yep, just me out here making a movie all by myself. Wooden camera, Spielberg hasn't discovered this yet. When I made this picture, it was really one of those very extraordinary moments for me because this is on Sunset Boulevard on kind of a quiet part of it. It was about midnight. I was by myself. And these two women came whizzing down on bikes. And they started hollering, and they just screamed on their bikes into this parking lot where I was sitting. And they go, oh my God, what the hell is that? That's got to be an 11 by 14 or 16 by 20 camera or something. And my jaw hit the ground. I was like, yeah, it's a 16 by 20 camera. How on earth would you know that? And they said, well, we're students at the Art Center and yada yada. So we talked a little bit. They're like, what are you doing out here? Where do you live? I said, oh, I live in San Diego. And they're like, oh. Yeah, we've heard of that place. I was like, yeah, it's kind of cool. Maybe you should come down sometime. But finally they said, so what are you taking a picture of? And I mean, here, there's this giant camera, and it's pointed, boom, right? It's like a cannon. And I'm like, well, that building. That building? I was like, yeah, why? I was like, oh my God, look at that thing. I'm like, it's miraculous. That building is like an Edward Hopper painting or something. And they just looked at me and they went, huh. And eventually they went on their way and I went on my way. Still one of my favorite photographs from that time in Los Angeles. But making these pictures was really, it's a voyage of discovery to do this, to pursue any creative endeavor. It's a discovery of yourself, it's a discovery of visual culture, it's a discovery of a lot of things. This work really spanned about 15 years by the time it was all said and done. And I was still making pictures in the desert as this was going on. And eventually I started to wonder, well, what can I do? I want to keep pushing this further. I'm really committed to this 19th century process of printing, of hand coding these sheets of paper and things. But photography for me is evolving, and I want to evolve with it. And so I really started putting a lot of creative energy into what would I do next. And I spent a lot of time in the desert, a week at a time, if I can carve it out, in the middle of places where I won't see people. This isn't Anza-Borrego. I'm talking in Mexico or bombing ranges in Arizona and other places that I don't tend to talk about. But places that people don't really go. And so that experience to me is part of the magic of photography because it's about sitting still and it's about being with things. But that experience of the overwhelming, blinding, enormous light that you've all felt when you drive into Palm Springs, when you go to Joshua Tree, when you go to Anza-Borrego, it's enveloping and it's seductive. It's amazing. And that to me really is what started to push this idea of, what if I take this camera that I have, this giant beast, And I use this 19th century process, and I do something unorthodox with it. And this is really where the current work that I've been doing for the last few years has taken me. And what's really rewarding about this work for me is a number of things. One, you can't Google this and like find something out about it. Like I've told this to students in classes before of like, well, I'm making platinum paper negatives. Platinum's the process, a negative is what photography naturally makes, and it's on a paper support. And I would say, you can't Google platinum paper negative and come up with anything. And I honestly said this for about 2 years before I was like, I should probably Google that and find out if anything comes up. Kind of, sort of, some things came up, but it was a little bit more of what I might expect of people making just a negative image of something. Nobody doing something ridiculous like this. To me, this work is really about an exploration of the invisible. It's an exploration of the overwhelming light and space that defines the American Southwest. And it's about the plants that I love so much in the desert, that make the desert so special to me. With the advent of Instagram, which I love and use a lot, and social media, and just the way images are proliferating in the world, the interest of photography to me has really changed. And so this kind of practice of making these negative images that are really ghostly has been interesting to me because it's more about the experience of capturing emotions of what something feels like, that overwhelming light and space, than it is of capturing what something looks like. And of course, photography does its job so well when it shows you what something looks like. But for me, it also has that great ability to show you what something feels like. And that was an important distinction for me in starting to make this work. So I started the talk by giving you a definition, my own definition of what magic is, to make something visible that was previously invisible. For me, making photographs at night, doing ridiculous, like unorthodox things with this 19th century process inside a giant camera in the desert, sitting there for many hours in the middle of the day just to expose this ghostly trace, is certainly part of that magic and part of that idea that I kind of repacked into this definition, which I thought was appropriate for the talk, considering I can't do tricks, I can't make things levitate, I can't do the traditional magic that maybe you expected. But it also reminded me that I want to give you guys advice. Advice on good living and living a magical life. And I want to give you a few examples that are about how I have lived a life that I think is passionate and worthy, maybe magical. The first is be curious about the world. Wonder about things. Let the cell phone go for a little bit. Like rediscover a book, rediscover boredom, rediscover something that feeds that curiosity that I think we've lost. It's really crazy. I love the time we live in, but it's like kind of maddening sometimes too, because I'm like, I'm never bored anymore. And boredom is like what drives creativity. So trying things, we're all messengers. We all have some vessel of magic within us. Try things, experiment, like do crazy shit. And this is what really leads to the birth of the nonprofit organization that I run. That could be our alternate mission, do crazy shit. But it's not. We're a little more professional than that. But I want to lead up to some of the crazy shit that I've done, which ultimately led to the craziest thing, which is starting this nonprofit organization. So in addition to spending time in the desert and sitting there for hours on end, hanging out, making art, doing whatever I do out there, I run across weird things, and my mind never stops working. Like, it's a curse. And so I ran into this thing. This is on the edge of the Salton Sea. This is just like some bizarre structure that I found out there. And I had seen it once, twice, I'd gone back, and I couldn't get this idea out of my mind that like something needs to be done with this. So this thing, this structure, sits at an abandoned Navy base on the edge of the Salton Sea. And I thought, well, I think people need to find out more about this Navy base. And so I had this idea, well, I can use my skills as a graphic designer, which I've done. I can use my skills as a creative person. And so I made this sign, this giant sign, welcome to the Salton Sea Navy Test Base, as if it's still a thing today. I mean, mind you, you have to drive about 5 miles on four-wheel drive roads to get to this thing. And I thought, if anybody's going to go out there, they should be rewarded for this. And so I made this sign with kind of a combination of like fact and fantasy. Like real facts about like what happened there, a little bit of fantasy. It was really cheeky, but ultimately it was founded in this very kind of like structured, this used to be used for this. There's a lot of fish that live here, even though they're dead at your feet. They used to make movies here, etc. And so I had a buddy who's helps out with some of the signage at Creative Mornings. I like to make those connections. This is about 10 years ago. And he printed this sign for me. And so I self-funded this crazy idea. I worked in a museum at the time, so I had access to like stainless steel, high security hardware and things. And so I concepted this whole thing of like, nobody is ever gonna do anything to this sign. Like there's no way they could get it gone unless they just took a chainsaw and cut it off at the knees. But anyway, so we held a little party, went out, put this sign up, and boom, there it is. Welcome to the Salton Sea Navy Test Base, folks. It was a lot of fun to do. Some people might think I'm crazy for spending hundreds of dollars and like hours of time to do this for the pleasure of like a few people that I will never meet. And it is kind of crazy. On one of my visits back out to this sign, I found a couple little army men up on the corners of it. And I was like, awesome, somebody got it. They got the message. And you have to wonder, like, who had army men out here? They probably wondered, who installed a sign out here? The sign had a symbol. You can kind of see it in that picture. It was a little globe, a little wireframe globe symbol. And it said that this sign was installed by this organization, the Society for the Advancement of Public Places, or SAP.org. About a year later, I went out and the sign was destroyed, like gone. I mean, violently destroyed. The structure is still there. So I've thought of making like an even more permanent sign, but that would cost maybe $1,000, and it's a little bit too much. But these kinds of things I like to say they keep me out of trouble. They definitely fuel my creativity. I also like to climb mountains out there. And I had this idea of, well, what if I installed like a sign on top of a mountain that like talked about something? And so a buddy and I created this sign. I have some sign making skills too. Valuable things that will carry you far in life. And we hiked up this mountain. It was about a 5-hour hike to get to the top, and put this sign up. And the sign says this: Misanthrope Society meets here, first Thursday of each month at 2 a.m. Attendees will be dismissed. For those of you who do not know what a misanthrope is, I didn't know either at one point in my life. And then I discovered the word, and I was like, that is a brilliant word. A misanthrope, it's a person who hates people. And I was like, a misanthrope society, like that's kind of the ultimate thing. So, so here this sign sat in the patch of cholla up there. I found a couple weird YouTube videos of hikers that go up and they're like, what is this? And shaky video camera, this thing, and bad music in the background and stuff. I think it's still there. I don't know. I haven't been back for a while. But ultimately, these kind of creative ideas are what fueled the birth of the organization that I started. And being involved in photography for almost 20 years now, I'm only 21 years old. But I started when I was really young, like super young. But I have been involved in photography for about 20 years. And over that time, it's inevitable that you're just going to meet a lot of really good people. People that have something to say, people that use cameras or materials or photography in a creative way that inspires you. I, as an artist, have been inspired by so many people, specifically by live lectures of people, kind of like what you're watching right now, that I thought, well, that's kind of a crazy idea. Maybe San Diego needs a little bit more of this, or some of this, because it really didn't exist, having a regular lecture series. And so that was really what started the birth of this idea, arguably my craziest idea yet, because it's literally consumed 5 years of my life. This is the 5th year that Medium is happening. You can see the dates there, 20th to the 23rd of 2016. So Medium is two things. It starts with 2 days of portfolio reviews, where we bring in ad agencies, we bring in museum curators, we bring in gallery owners, we bring in magazine editors, we bring in a bunch of professionals from the field who use photography, and then photographers register for this event about 6 months in advance. It books in about 48 hours. And they come for what is often called speed dating meetings. These are seriously like high impact, really, really beneficial things for photographers. It's largely how I've built my career. These exist all over the world. There's kind of only one other than Medium that happens in California, which happens in Palm Springs. And I thought, you know, urban coastal California, San Diego, where I live and the community that I care about needs this and deserves this. And so Medium was born. So we bring in curators and artists together to meet with photographers. We have an open portfolio walk where all of those 65 participating photographers open their portfolios to the public. We get about 300 people. Room kind of looks about like this. This is on October 20th at the Lafayette Hotel. If you're interested, totally free and really, really amazing. Whether you're a photographer, whether you run an ad agency, whether you're a creative director, whether you're just somebody that likes creativity, which I think some of you, does anybody here like creativity? Show of hands. It's really, really an awesome thing. And then we have an entire weekend of artist lectures that sort of rounds out the weekend. It's really, really a great, great experience. I don't say that because I started it. I say it because that's what people have told us. It feels to me a lot like how this community feels. I was talking to one of the volunteers earlier today, and she said, what do you love about Creative Mornings? And I said, honestly, I love the community here. I've met so many cool people. Our lawyer, graphic designers. I've met so many awesome people who have helped me make Medium great. And I'm really grateful to those people for that help. It wouldn't have happened without Creative Mornings. And so that's my little pitch about these kind of events. Talk to people, meet people, introduce yourself to a stranger. It's really, really an amazing, amazing experience. We also have a number of different parties and events, things. We have a juried exhibition that happens at Low Gallery in Barrio Logan that opens on October 22nd. Yeah, that's it. No, I'm kidding. One of the things that I did want to do, though, is to kind of do a throwback or whatever the young people call it these days, a shout out, something. I want to make an offer to all of you. And the offer is this. We'll give away 3 pairs of passes to our keynote lecture. It's with a woman named Penelope Umbrico. She's a contemporary artist from New York City who uses photography in really amazing and interesting ways. She doesn't really use a camera. She uses other people's photographs in ways that are profound and provocative. We're going to give away 3 passes, 3 pairs of passes, I should say. If you make a picture today that shows us some kind of magic, and you tag Medium and Creative Mornings. This is today, whatever your pictures are going to be. Throw it up on Instagram. That's the platform we're looking at. We're going to choose 3 people, and we'll contact you tomorrow, and we'll give you a pair of passes for doing it. We have a bunch of material, business cards, little flyers, and other super cool things out on this giant spool in the lobby. So grab them on your way out. There's also a big jar out there if you want to join our mailing list and learn more about what this organization does. We're happy to add you to the mailing list, so throw a business card in there. So To wrap this up and to bring it full circle with that idea of magic, everybody in this room is magic. You all have vessels of creativity and inspiration and awesome life experiences that you wake up with every day, that you go to bed with every night. Use it. Take that creativity and channel it into something for good. It's really, really a rewarding way to live. It's a rewarding way to help build community. And it's a rewarding way to impress people and make San Diego a better place to be. Just like Aristotle did when he noticed those wormholes projecting light through a tree during a solar eclipse. Thank you so much.